Hi everyone. I'm going to start out today with one of my absolute favorite quotes. It's in a book called Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. And the quote goes like this: "No wonder kids grow up crazy. The cat's cradle, it's just a bunch of X's between two hands. And the kids look and look and look and no damn cat and no damn cradle." I mean, what are a cat and a cradle to kids? A cat is comfort and a cradle is security. And kids want comfort and security. As it turns out, we as adults, we also want comfort and security. And so we're taught, if we pay attention to the economy and we have a healthy economy and we work hard, we have a chance at comfort and security. That's how we do that. We even develop measurements to keep track of how well the economy is doing. For example, the gross domestic product, GDP. And we pay attention to that. But the GDP is a financial indicator. So for example, what the GDP doesn't include is you have a kid, the kid gets sick, you have to stay home with your sick kid. That's not part of the GDP. It turns out, unless you take your kid to the doctor or buy your kid prescriptions, that's not part of the GDP. Your missing work is not part of the GDP. Taking care of your elderly parents is not part of the GDP unless you're paying someone else to do it. We grow trees and we have minerals in the ground. That's not part of the GDP until we cut down the trees, take the minerals out of the ground, make stuff with it, and then sell it for money. Then it's part of the GDP. We want clean air, we want clean water. That's not part of the GDP until it gets dirty, and then we have to pay money to clean it up. So the GDP obviously is limited in what it can do, and this is a problem because we pay attention to those things that we measure, and the GDP is only measuring financial transactions. It's gross domestic product. It's measuring productivity. So, how do we get here? We're paying this huge attention to money, but we want comfort and security and trust and all these other things. Well, it's actually a very interesting story. There's a guy named Simon Kuznets. I hope I pronounced his name right, although he was alive a while ago. In the 30s, he developed a system to measure the productivity of the country in advance of going to war. And the purpose of measuring all of this was to be able to fight the war better. And when he released his report, he said, by the way, don't use this as a measure for social welfare because it's not accounting for the right things. Specifically, amongst his list of things that this was not taking into account is what happens in the household, which he said explicitly is a substantive part of the economy, and what happens in the community, which is also a substantive part of the economy. So for 75 plus years, we've been paying very close attention to the way our financial world works and saying, okay, we're going to have a healthy economy. We're going to look at this. We're going to try all these different things to get better and better at understanding finance and understanding our economics in this way. We know an awful lot about our financial health. But what do we know about our community health? Well, Dan brought up other kinds of community activities that aren't necessarily part of a nonprofit organization, or they can be. I mean, Ushahidi is a nonprofit organization. But we do have nonprofit organizations that take up some of what goes on in a community. Although some things might just be, you're helping your friend with homework, or you're, helping your friend's kid with homework. They're not necessarily part of an organizational structure. Some things happen in the home, as I mentioned. So there are nonprofits, they're part of the community structure. So we have the GDP that's measuring what's going on in the financial world, and now we have these nonprofits that, for part of the community, doing some measurement too. So how do nonprofits measure things? Nonprofits typically look at outcomes, although they do sometimes get to the point where they're looking at impact. But whether it's outcomes or impact, it's going to be measured in things like how many pounds of clothing are collected, how many miles of beach are cleaned up during a cleaning program, how many pounds of food are given to how many families at a food shelf, how many children show up for the free clinic to get their asthma inhaler refilled. Those are the kinds of things that people measure, and then they might do some impact to see how that affects the community. But unless the community has some sense of what the community needs, you don't really have a good sense of, to the extent that meets the health need of the community. And even if the community does have a good sense of what it means, it's still pretty imprecise. It's completely separate from the financial world mostly separate from the financial world. I'll get to that in a second. So we pay attention to what we measure, and we have one of the most powerful economies in the world, struggling as it might be right now. On the other side of the coin, we have one of the highest homicide rates in the world, and we're 49th in the world in the survivability of mothers who give childbirth. So we know that we've been spending 75 plus years paying attention very carefully to the financial world. We've been trying to figure out what to do on the community side, but we just really haven't had the wherewithal to get there. It's very, very difficult to see the whole health of the world unless we're relating these systems to each other and also to families. So traditionally, there have been some connections across this divide, and in fact, people who've been raised in a traditional business environment will tell you that the purpose of markets is to meet the needs of individuals. So I might say, I need to get from one place to another, and I would like to do it safely. And so Michelin has this lovely ad that points out that their tires are very safe and they can get in there safely. People make all kinds of goods and services to help people get through their daily life. I can buy a bicycle, I can go buy food at a restaurant, I can go buy really healthy vegan food because I live in San Francisco. There's all kinds of goods and services that are provided that really do enrich our lives, and people who've been classically trained in finance and business are trained to believe very strongly that if you pay attention to that, then you will eventually meet the needs of the world. So it's important to really understand that there's not, despite stories of greed and corruption, there's greed and corruption everywhere, and there might be more or less of it in the financial world, but the fact is, given that the only thing that was really well measured was the financial side of the world, it makes some sense to say, well, that part I understand, that part I control, I can do the best I can't know everything, I'm trying. And so I really think it's important to not demonize what's going on in the financial world, except for in those places where people are literally, doing something that's criminally wrong. On the other side of the coin, so we're talking about how businesses think about the community, they're thinking about people, they're thinking about their needs. Going the other direction, the way that this has been traditionally tied back, the financial system and the community, is nonprofits, of course, get tax breaks, and individuals who have dependents, they get tax breaks, and so it's really been the tax code that has tied these things together to the extent it's been tied together, but that's the limit of how thoroughly it's been formally tied together until fairly recently. And the thing to remember is they aren't actually these separate silos. This is actually an inclusive system. We're just focused on the financial part. And the reason why that's particularly important is because when we talk about recession, people get very fearful. And I've forgotten who spoke earlier about how when you're in a state of fear, you get very focused and it's hard to think broadly and it's hard to solve problems. But that's a really important component of this, and I want to draw that out. We don't need to only focus on the financial side. There's all kinds of other things that happen in the world, even if people are having a hard time getting a job. So for example, since we don't measure it, we don't know. Our communities might benefit to some degree, even in a recession. Maybe people are learning a lot. Maybe they're cleaning up their environment more. Maybe they're working on their health because they don't have a job and they have an extra couple hours a day. We don't know because we don't track all that and we don't tie it all together. But I do have a lot of good news. There are people who are working to tie these things together. And it runs really kind of the whole range. The family, the community, and business. And that's, health, trust. This morning we heard about compassion. These are all creativity, influence. These are all related to what we think of as security and comfort. They're the parts of our lives that we truly value. And there's actually a formal name for these. They're called intangible assets. There's a couple things you should know about intangible assets. The first is they really are the more the merrier. You can't kind of have too much trust. The other thing about intangible assets is they're not scarce, they're abundant. So for example, if I trust my friend and I get a new friend, I don't have to have the trust of this friend because now I have two. If I have 5 friends, they don't only get 1/5 of my trust, right? I can trust all of them. So that's a very important difference than what we're thinking about in terms of tangible goods. I have to divide my hands up between my 5 friends. So that's one side of the coin. And then the other is, the reason why they're intangible goods is that they're not fully describable. And I don't mean we have a problem with our creativity. I mean that we can't, by their nature, fully define exactly what they are. Because we can't do that, then we can't make a contract about them, and then we can't trade them, so we can't exchange them for money. So it's complicated to try to relate these things to the financial world. And you might hear the term monetizing a lot. And let me explain what monetizing is. So monetizing intangible assets, monetizing social capital. And if you think about knowledge in particular, how does learning really happen? Well, I might say, wow, that's really interesting. I want to learn about that. Oh, wow, I have some new ideas. Ooh, that sounds interesting. And I go some other place and I learn about that. And I go over here and I learn some more. And I build up my knowledge. And I start thinking, wait, there's a need in the community. I can tie these things together and serve the community. So I start thinking about a product. And then I get to the point where maybe I can actually articulate my ideas and start thinking about really product development. And then turn it into a product or into a patent or something like that at the end. So if you think of the whole range, there's a lot of this stuff that's very ill-described and intangible that goes on before I can really start being articulate. And then it's this last little bit that could be potentially monetized and pushed into the tangible asset or the financial asset category, the intangible asset category. But it's this whole large area here that are intangible, and they just, that's by their nature, they can't be described. So we can think about all these things as the building blocks of the world of intangible assets. You can think of it this way. If you have 5 people in a room, they trust each other and they're healthy and they have knowledge, and you say, hey, solve a problem, they can probably solve that problem, or at least they can try. But if you take any of that away, if they don't like each other, they don't trust each other, or they're really healthy, they feel terrible all the time, or they're kind of dumb, and they don't know how to learn, and they can't get the right knowledge, then you can't solve the problem. And if you think about that upside down, what you're really saying is that if you have a productive asset, you know that the intangible assets have been there. You can't have a productive asset without already having intangible assets. That makes them everywhere. That means they're in the family, they're in the home, they're in the community, and they're also in business. So the family and the community care about intangible assets because that's the way that they're thinking. They want trust, they want health. These are things that you want in your personal life. It's very personal. Businesses want them, want to keep track of intangible assets because they know, as Dan was saying earlier, you know if you have high morale or low morale, you know if everybody's getting sick or not. So it's important for businesses, if they want to be productive, to keep morale up and all these other things. And the second reason why businesses might do want to keep track of intangible assets is a little bit more esoteric, but to make a long story short, if you're in the company, you know how it's doing. And if you're an investor in the company, you have absolutely no idea comparatively. So there's a gap here, and that gap means that there's an uncertainty, and if there's an uncertainty, that means it pushes down the valuation. So the businesses have 2 different reasons. One is because they want to be more productive, and then for businesses that are seeking valuation and have outside investors, they care because they're not being properly valued if they aren't transparent and they don't have good intangible asset reporting. So, what I want to impress you upon you is that these kinds of things, this understanding is really an inevitable movement. It's been going on for 10 years. It's really becoming a robust ecosystem. And pretty much everyone, nonprofits, for-profits, families, community members, all, whether they're calling this an intangible asset because that's a technical term, or they're talking about trust or compassion or whatever, have some desire to see these things grow and to understand how they interact. So as a society, we're innovating. And we're innovating these core mechanisms. This is a very complicated thing, and it's a little bit frightening, honestly. I'm going to skip a little bit here because I'm running a little out of time. So this is going to be a little bit scary, and we can push it aside. I'm asking you to do something that's really a little bit scary. I'm asking you to push aside something that we've been using for all this time as a measure of the health of our world, which is this measure of production. And then I'm going to ask to look into this other realm of intangible assets like compassion and trust and health and knowledge, and understand how all of those different items interact with each other to build each other and then interact with production. There's many different ways that you can pay attention to do this. And there are all these experiments that can be done and will be done over the next however long it takes for us to end up with the model here. And as an individual, you might form a business or work in a business that provides goods or services into the community, a social entrepreneur. or you might be an impact investor on that side. Also, you might just decide that you're working in a company making Michelin tires, and you track what the effect is of your company onto the community, or vice versa. You're working in a community and you can keep track of and attend to those things that are important to you as they move back. This data is going to be very, very important. And then the third component of this that everybody can do is just develop an experimental mindset as we try all these different items, as we look, as we try all these different ways to solve this problem of having the divided measurement system between our financial world and our community. There are some things that are going to work really well, and there's some things that are going to work not so well, and we're going to have to let go of those things that don't work very well and try new things, and to not judge when there's failure, because we're in an innovative environment, and we know in Silicon Valley that innovation means not to be afraid of failure, but to just keep trying. And then at some point we'll end up with a model, and the model will be focused on an individual and their role in different areas of society. This is not unlike having a climatological model. It used to be long ago, red sky at night, sailors delight, red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. Or I used to roll up my window and say, oh, it's raining, I need an umbrella. And we had that level of sophistication in climate, and then nowadays we have a situation where if the Pacific Ocean warms up, we can predict the climate next year in London. Eventually we'll have a situation where we have an economic model where we understand what goes on in the community, we understand what goes on at an individual level, we understand what goes on in a business context. We can relate all these things together, and then we really will have a situation where we understand how to build comfort and security and bring peace into